We begin this morning with Salt Lake Tribune columnist Robert Gehrke. Robert, great to have you back on the show. Always glad to have you with us.
Yeah, good to see you.
All right, plenty to talk about. There's no lack in Utah politics that way. Let's start with education funding, because we're going through this tax reform process. It's kind of a convoluted backstory on taxes in Utah and how they're limited and whatnot. But you make the argument that we shouldn't be taking away from our already underfunded schools as we go through this process.
Right.
Set that up for us.
Right. So the easiest way to envision this is the state budget's divided into two buckets. You've got the income tax bucket, and all of that under the Constitution goes to public and higher education. And the other bucket is the sales tax bucket. And all of that goes into things like social services, public safety, corrections, courts, things like that. It pays for basically everything else. And that's the way it's always worked. And the issue right now, in some legislators' eyes, is that the income tax bucket is being filled too fast, whereas the sales tax bucket isn't being filled fast enough. And so they want to look at getting rid of this earmark in the Constitution, sending all of that income tax to education. It's been that way since 1931 when he instituted the income tax. In '96, the higher ed was added to it. So Senator Kurt Bramble has a bill file open that would get rid of the amended Constitution, get rid of that earmark, and then they can use all of the money. Instead of having two buckets, they'll just dump it all into one big trough and divvy it up that way. The problem with that becomes, we're already last in the country in education funding, per pupil education funding. And if you take away the guaranteed revenue stream for education, I think then you're trusting legislators to make sure education is properly funded. And it hasn't been already. If they want to put more money into it, they can now. But this only frees up their hands to put less money into it and divert that money into other places.
You also mentioned the fact, though, that they've put billions of dollars into education over the last 4 years. How much more can you divert to education?
Well, I mean, they put 1.1 billion into education in the last 4 years in new money, but that's because they have to, because the Constitution says the income tax has to go to education. And so, so we've had good economic growth, we've had good job growth, and so all of that money's been going into education. The problem that they really need to address is this imbalance, this structural problem with the sales tax, because right now we're buying fewer things, but we're also not paying sales tax on things like car washes and Lyft rides, attorneys, doctors, things like that. We don't pay sales tax on, and that's more and more of our economy now. So, but to address that, they've got to have the political courage, I guess, to take on the big lobbyists like that represent the attorneys, the realtors, and the doctors.
And we even saw small business owners coming together in groups, really opposing what was presented during the session.
Sure. If you're not paying the tax now, you don't want to pay the tax in the future. And so, but there is a fairness question too. Why do we tax some services and not others? Why do we tax dry cleaners, for example, but not cosmetic surgeons?
We always hear the governor say, yes, we have that dubious distinction, but look at our results. He argues that we're getting the good results.
And I think there's something to that. Like, to be fair, we have great teachers. We have who do really good work. They don't get paid what they should, but they do it anyway for other reasons. If you compare us to other states that have high per pupil spending, we do better than some of them. But if you compare us to states that have similar demographics, we are sort of in the middle of the road. And at the end of the day, we can do better. And this is the priority, the number one priority for voters in poll after poll after poll. And so to start saying, well, we don't necessarily want to make sure it's taken care of, I think would be the wrong way to go.
I've kind of lived in both ends of the spectrum. My kids have mostly been educated here in the state of Utah, but I've also lived in one of the top states. If I'm being honest, I wouldn't say I really noticed much of a difference in the education they received in both states, but there was a clear difference in the teachers' attitudes in the other state because they were paid well and they felt like they were respected.
Well, and we have a real problem right now too in this state because we're seeing in the Salt Lake City School District negotiations breaking down as the teachers are trying to come up with a new contract. And the district has limited resources, and the teachers say we've been underpaid for long enough, the economy's good, we can take our skills elsewhere if you don't want to pay us. And so it's coming to a head, I think, here pretty shortly.
Yeah, I guess I should also mention in that other state I lived in, I certainly noticed the taxes coming out more out of quite as well. Okay, Mueller report and President Trump. You say this was an issue you wanted to steer clear of for quite a while, but now you say you make the argument that it's time for Congress to begin the impeachment proceedings. Why is that?
Yeah, I guess I was on the fence for a long time because like you, I lived through the Bill Clinton impeachment, and it was a pretty brutal process, and it was a very political process. And I think going back down that road is not something you take on lightly.
Sure.
But I felt like after the special counsel made his statement a couple weeks ago saying, he can't charge the president. It's up to Congress to be responsible for, policing the president. And then, so Congress decided, well, we're going to issue subpoenas. We want to have testimony. But the administration has resisted that every step of the way. The only tool they have left at this point is to initiate an impeachment inquiry. And that strengthens their hand in terms of getting the information that they need to get in order to answer the question that I think Americans deserve to have answered. And maybe at the end of the day, it doesn't make any difference because, as I said in the column, obviously the Republican Senate is not inclined to actually expel the president or censure the president. But at the very least, we can get the information. The Mueller report took us down to the 2-yard line, to use the old football metaphor, and he said he couldn't get it across the goal line, and I think this is the only avenue to do that.
One interesting thing I wanted to bring up real quick. It's one thing to say our Republicans are saying, standing against impeachment, but our Democrat. Our lone Democrat, and I understand it's politically expedient for him to take that, but he has even said, look, the bar is really high for impeachment, and I don't believe it reaches that bar.
Yeah, and it's been interesting because we've even seen some Republicans in the House saying that they would support impeachment, and Representative McAdams, it's a legitimate argument that we don't want to venture down that road. The question has been answered. People can read the report if they want to read the report and draw their own conclusions. But at the same time, Congress has a job under the Constitution, and that is to, in instances where there are high crimes and misdemeanors, to impeach the president. And one thing I want to be clear of, I'm not saying that we start an impeachment process and the next day, the House is passing articles of impeachment and the Senate's voting. This is a process. It's an inquiry, and so it would necessitate getting documents, calling witnesses, calling legal experts to opine about whether you can obstruct justice if there's not an underlying crime. So I think those are they're important questions, and for Congress to punt on that, I think, is the wrong way to go.
Okay, we have about a minute left. I want to bring this up real quick. Medicaid expansion. We're going through the public comment process right now for the latest waiver.
Yeah.
You make an argument that what's happening in Utah could have a negative impact across the country.
Right, because when we passed Proposition 3, voters made clear that they wanted a clean Medicaid expansion. The legislature monkeyed with that. Now they're going to the Trump administration to say, okay, we'll take less money per patient, but we want to be able to cap enrollment. They're already covering 60,000 fewer people. That's not what the voters voted for. And the Trump administration, if they allow those caps to go into place, plus the work requirement that they've already approved, if they allow those caps to go into place, it sets a precedent for other states to follow and dramatically undermines the Medicaid expansion that has helped tens of thousands of people, hundreds of thousands of people across the country. And you've also got this situation where this is something that the Trump administration has made clear for a long time that they've wanted to do, these caps, that they've wanted those caps in place because they think it'll save a lot of money. But you can't save the money unless you're covering fewer people or providing them less coverage. And so that's what this is really about. They're trying to get something administratively through this Utah waiver that they couldn't get through Congress in the past.
All right, we'll watch to see how that plays out. Always great having you on the show. Where can our viewers follow you at?
You can find me at Robert Gerke on Twitter or anywhere at sltrib.com.
Okay, thanks so much for being here. Appreciate your
sure.
time.